Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk. Light Talk. Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk.
Hello and welcome to Light Talk. This is Stan, broadcasting from my state-of-the-art studio in the swamps of Gainesville, Florida.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas.
And this is David, broadcasting from the beautiful Belmont Shore area of Long Beach, California. And we are the Lumen Brothers! Welcome, everyone, to our one-year anniversary show. Boy, we've been waiting a year to do this, and it's finally come. That's fantastic. So we have some really exciting things today, and as you all know, we've talked about what the show is going to consist of, and I just can't believe that we've been doing this every week for a year. I mean, what do you think, Steve?
We're
still here.
I know. I remember when we started, and we thought, maybe if we get 20 people listening, that'll be great. And we're about to, we're getting about 3,500, 4,000 downloads a month now. We're closing in on 1,000 people following us on Facebook. You keep track of this better than I do, David. How many countries are we in now?
So we're at 67 countries.
Whoa.
And we cannot forget the Faroe Islands, who are avid listeners. And we're very excited about that. We've actually had some people ask about our mystery guest today from the Faroe Islands. So I think they're going to be very, very pleased.
I want to point out that the Canary Islands are upping the game. They joined last week also. So this is going to be an island duel going on. Well,
the Canary Islands are lovely. I wonder if it's in Las Palmas. That's where I've been. It's beautiful, beautiful there. Anyway, but most people always ask us, how the hell did you guys survive a year? Well, we have no idea. So anyway, as promised, in honor of this journey of lighting insanity, we have a very special surprise mystery guest with us today. And that person, we are so proud to present, one of the most notable and groundbreaking lighting designers in theater history, Mr. Don Holder. Well,
Hi.
welcome, Don.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, man, we're great. How are you, man?
I'm good. It's great to be here.
Oh, man, it's so great to have you here. I know you're right in the middle of a show right now. You're in Lincoln Center doing a new production of My Fair Lady.
Yes.
And thank you for taking the time between your previews. You guys are in previews now, right?
Yeah, we've been in previews for about 2 weeks.
Wow,
And
that's great.
Still hard at work. We got another 2 weeks to go.
Well, at least it's not a year. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, anyway, it's great to have you with us today. And Steve, why don't you inform our listeners of some of the many highlights of Don's career?
Well, Don Holder has worked extensively in theater, opera, dance, architectural, and television lighting in the U.S. and abroad for over 25 years. He has designed more than 50 Broadway productions and has been nominated for 12 Tony Awards, winning the Tony for Best Lighting Design for The Lion King and the 2008 revival of South Pacific. His recent and upcoming Broadway productions include Oslo, Anastasia, Bullets Over Broadway, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, She Loves Me, Fiddler on the Roof, The Bridges of Madison County, The King and I, Lincoln Center Theater, On the 20th Century, Golden Boy, Come Fly Away, Ragtime, and Moving Out. Projects at the New York Metropolitan Opera include Othello, Julie Taymor's production of The Magic Flute, Two Boys, and the upcoming Samson and Delilah. He has worked at most of the nation's leading resident theaters, including Baltimore's Center Stage, Arena Stage, the Goodman Theater, Steppenwolf Theater Company, Mark Taper Forum, Seattle Repertory, La Jolla Playhouse, Huntington Theater Company, South Coast Repertory, and the Williamstown Theater Festival. Don has designed over 100 off-Broadway productions, including Adrienne Kennedy's He Brought Her Heart Back in a Box at Theater for a New Audience. His television and film work includes the theatrical lighting for seasons 1 and 2 of Smash for NBC and DreamWorks, and the upcoming Warner Brothers feature Ocean's 8. Don was the head of the lighting design program at the California Institute of the Arts from 2006 to 2010, and is presently head of lighting design at Rutgers University. Don is the recipient of an honorary doctorate from Muhlenberg College and is a graduate of the University of Maine and the Yale University School of Drama. Don is presently, as David said, in New York City working on a new production of My Fair Lady at the Lincoln Center, where he joins us today. So Don, welcome to Light Talk. Man.
Well, listening to that bio, I got really tired just thinking about all those productions.
I'm exhausted. That's a whole, that's like 5 people's careers right there, man.
Too much. Too much.
Anyway, we love it, Don.
We left something out of the bio, and a student pointed it out to me, and it's Big Fish. And
yes.
She said to me, I kid you not, the lighting for that changed my life and inspired me to do this.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, she said it was magical. It was
that's
just
great. I mean, yeah, I was proud of it, but I couldn't list everything. I mean, as it was, you were reading forever. I was getting more and more exhausted. But yes, and I noticed that one of your promos. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that, right? That your big fish cakes.
Hey, that's great. He's our new sponsor, Big Fish Cakes.
Yeah, I assume there's some vague reference to that production, but I could be wrong.
You have found us out.
Don and I have a history about Big Fish. So,
yes,
which we'll go into.
We both turned down the Long Beach production, right?
That's right.
I think it was all about magic and storytelling and sort of things coming out of the ether, these amazing images. And it was a real interesting marriage of projection and light and really, really challenging and fun collaboration. So I'm glad that one of your students loved it and was inspired by it. That's so great to hear.
Yeah, isn't that great?
It is.
When you know that you've inspired someone, and I'm sure, Don, you have inspired so many. Anyway, our first question, most of our listeners know you as the lighting designer for The Lion King and Spider-Man, but we all know that there are shows that we work on that may not have commercial success, but are artistically and spiritually fulfilling. Could you please mention one or two of these shows from your career?
Well, I mean, there've been many. Some have been commercially fulfilling, and others not. But that's not the commercial aspects of the work. That's just icing on the cake. I mean, for me, it's about the process and who you're collaborating with. I mean, I've been lucky to work with some amazing people. I guess the one that's sort of clearest in my mind is what I just done off Broadway, and you mentioned earlier this Adrian Kennedy premiere of a play called He Brought Her Heart Back in a Box. It's about a mixed race couple in the South in a Georgia town back around the middle of the 20th century, sort of a relationship that was bound to end tragically. And Adrian Kennedy's work is quite imagistic. It's more of a tone poem and kind of a dreamscape than it is a realistic play with a linear narrative. So there's a lot of imagery and sort of abstract gestures that one makes to bring this play to life. There's a lot of intense collaboration happened, and what was really great is it was directed by my wife, who I don't really get to work with very much. And it was a sort of a wonderful, magical evening in the theater. It was so great to be working with her and that great team. So that was recent. Another one, I've done so many plays with Julie Taymor. We often hear about the two that you mentioned, Lion King and Spider-Man, but there have been so many others. One that was really fantastic was a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that we did. We opened that same theater where Heart in the Box premiered back in 2013. And Julie's production of Midsummer really was magical. It was a space that was transformed through light and simple materials like big swaths of fabric and sticks to create trees. And it was a big, open, sort of bold space, empty space, really, with the simplest of elements transformed through projection and light and movement and music and shadow puppetry to create this incredibly magical Athenian wood, where this enchanted place where Midsummer primarily takes place. And working with Julie, it's a very intensive process, a real close collaboration, but it's also quite spontaneous. Images often appear in ways that are quite surprising and unexpected. And she's able to make magic out of practically nothing. I mean, people think of her as the director of The Lion King and Spider-Man, which was a $75 million extravaganza. But in a way, this Midsummer, done with the simplest of gestures, was quite a spectacle in its own right. And it was so great to be working with her after the Spider-Man debacle and to be with her to, sort of re-emerge in the New York theater community. And it was a real triumph and quite special to be a part of.
How did you and Julie begin your relationship, your artistic relationship?
So Julie and I started working together in 1994. The meeting was quite accidental. I had actually been interested in her as director because I've heard such amazing things about her and tried kind of unsuccessfully to get her attention. And then I received this call in the middle of, not the middle of the night, 11 o'clock at night, from Jeff Horowitz, the artistic director of Theater for a New Audience. He mentioned that they had lost their lighting designer. They needed someone to start immediately on Titus Andronicus. Julie Taymor was directing. I couldn't believe that. So I immediately accepted the job and met with her the following morning, even though I didn't know the play or had never read the script. I just went to the meeting, and that's how our collaboration began. And it's been a fantastic partnership and an amazing thing for me for the last 24 years.
Yeah, that is really a great relationship you guys have. I guess we always find that with certain directors. I'd love to follow up on that and ask, how many directors do you find yourself working with now? And do you work with a lot of new directors, or is it mostly people you've worked with before?
Well, I just want to add one footnote about Julie, is that I found that I would have to say she's probably the most loyal person I've ever met, I've ever worked with. Not that other people aren't, but I think for her, loyalty is very important. And it's certainly, as you guys know, you're lighting designers, it's a kind of rare commodity in our business. So I think she's pretty special in that regard. I've had some long-term, I would say, collaborative relationships with several directors. I mean, not as long as with Julie, but I guess the longest one after her would be the guy I'm working with right now is Bart Shear, who's directing My Fair Lady, and I've done many musical revivals with him and operas and plays. And I would say he's probably my closest collaborator besides Julie. And it's interesting that Bart and Julie really have a good friendship and respect each other a great deal. I feel fortunate. I've worked with a variety of directors. I don't work with just these guys. I mean, things come up out of the blue, and I'm working with somebody new. But I think it's kind of natural that a lot of the people I work with are close to my generation or people who I've worked with over the years. They tend to want to keep working with me, but occasionally someone new is interested in collaborating, and I do that. But I mean, I'd say Bart and Julie are the longest term. I also did many projects with Twyla Tharp when she was creating theater work, and I've worked a lot, speaking of Big Fish, with Susan Stroman. So, and Anna Shapiro is another director I work with quite often. So some amazing artists, and it's interesting, most of them are women. I think it's just a coincidence, but I think I feel very fortunate with the projects I've done with these people. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Don. So, as you know, there's a recent EU ruling that they might ban the use of tungsten halogen lights in the entertainment industry by 2020, which is just around the corner. What effect do you think that's going to have on our lives?
Well, I'm sure as working designers, you've had the opportunity to compare the quality of light that's produced by even the best LED sources versus, let's say, a 750 watt tungsten halogen source 4 or ellipsoidal spotlight. And really, there's no comparison in terms of the purity of the light and the color of the light and the way it reacts to skin. And so I've been kind of amazed at the progress that the LED manufacturers have made in making their product much more sympathetic to skin tones, much more flexible and usable in the theater. But I still think there's really no substitution for light that is produced via heat. In other words, I think since the beginning of time, we as human beings are wired and have experienced light that has been derived from heat energy. So solid state technology, or LEDs, solid state lighting, is something very different. It's a very different quality of light. And why is it different? Because there are spikes in the visible spectrum, right? No LED source can deliver everything in the visible spectrum. That's just one of the things. But I think there's also a subliminal difference, because I think we as human beings can somehow subconsciously detect this. Maybe I'm completely wrong. So that's one thing. So I think there's going to be a big influence and a big sea change as far as I'm concerned in terms of the quality of light we're able as lighting designers to deliver in the theater if this directive ultimately comes to our shores, which it probably will. It's just later, but it will. In the more immediate future, it's of great concern to me because I guess I have the blessing and potentially the curse, if this actually happens, of having at least 2, if not more, long-running productions running in London and Hamburg. The Lion King has 2 shows that are almost approaching 20 years old, which are primarily tungsten-sourced lighting rigs. And if this directive goes through, that means sometime in September 2020, we would potentially have to shut these shows down, take all the lighting out, put all new LED gear in, and retech the productions. Wow. You're talking about an immense capital investment, a lot of time, and really, I think, a deviation from the original design intent. It's not to say that we're not slowly transitioning right now. We are putting LED sources into those productions, but the wholesale change is something entirely different. And it's not just The Lion King. I mean, there's Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, all these big shows, Wicked. Any show running in Europe right now would be affected by this. And what about all the small theater companies who don't have the money to buy LED fixtures? All of a sudden, they're going to be out of business. Yep. So this is a big thing that ultimately is going to affect all of us. And it, like I said, it's a twofold thing. It's about the quality of light, but it's also about just the logistics and the money involved.
Yeah, so true. It's so interesting because on last week's show, we were talking about fluorescent fixtures and how fluorescents drive me crazy because of the vibration in them. And that's also a spiky type of source as well. And I think there's something psychological that happens to us when we're sitting in a room of fluorescence, and also, as you're saying, maybe even LEDs, which leads us to my next question, which is, you mentioned in your TED Talk about the clear physiological and psychological relationships between light and humans. Would you like to tell us about how you use this in your designs?
Well, I think that, as all lighting design, I think we all do it. What does a lighting designer do? A lighting designer reveals the world of the play, or it has a huge influence on what we see and how we see it, right? So I think that we all either intuitively or maybe intellectually or both understand that light has an influence on what we're seeing and how we see it, so that it alters perception, and affects the ability for us to reveal things in a way that are intended by our collaborators. So I don't think I use light any differently than anybody else, but I do understand that even the simplest choice, like making a scene blazingly bright or perhaps a lot darker, is going to have an effect on, maybe it's the amount of melatonin produced by your system, which is going to either cause you to relax or fall asleep or cause you to be sort of more agitated. I mean, if you understand that, you can always, I think we all know that, there's these sort of cliches and catchphrases like bright for comedy and blue light for romance, or, for serenity or ethereality. We all know that sort of intrinsically, but, then if you ask the question why, well, the reason is that we have, as human beings, have a physiological and psychological relationship to the light in the world around us. And I think if you understand that, and you should as a lighting designer, you're going to be more effective at manipulating the medium to accomplish whatever your objective is. Whether it's a storytelling objective or whether you really want to push the audience in a certain way, to feel a certain way at a particular moment. It's great to understand it instinctively, but I think there's great value in understanding and, doing some reading, doing some research, thinking about, okay, why do these choices do what they do? Why are they influential? Not just, well, I know they are because they are. So I think that's kind of our responsibility as lighting designers, to understand that.
Well, Don, I suspect that every young beginning lighting designer wants to be your assistant. What qualities do you look for when you're choosing an assistant?
I look for assistants primarily who are intelligent, who are self-motivated, who don't need a lot of supervision, who have a nurturing spirit, or at least have the potential to do that, who can anticipate versus react. I mean, I think that's very important. People who have enough knowledge and sympathy for the process that they know how to anticipate what's needed versus being told what to do. So there's a certain mindset and a level of intellect that's important, but also, especially now, assistants have to be highly skilled. They have to know a lot. There's a lot of software platforms that are kind of essential that they master or at least be quite good at. And I'm also interested in the personality of the person, because as we all know, we spend a lot of time together in the same room. So we want to work with people who we like, who we can imagine being in the same place or sharing the same space for many days and many hours. That's an intangible. But ultimately, I think an assistant, I would hope, would take care of me versus I'm taking care of the assistant. I feel like our role, it's not me versus them, or like somehow the assistant is my servant. I feel like it's a partnership, that I can't really do my work without the assistant, and the assistant can't obviously do their work without me. So I feel like we need to collaborate, we need to work together. I need to look and find people who I feel can fill that role. And it's very important. Ultimately, an assistant, a great assistant is with a great assistant, I should say, that's the only way you're going to be able to focus on what you should be focusing as a lighting designer, is what's on stage. So the bottom line is, I expect an assistant to take care of the peripheral so that I can focus on the end product, and can focus also on communicating with and staying in touch with my collaborators. If I have to worry about everything else, then you're distracted and you can't do your best work.
You are listening to Light Talk with Steve, Stan, and David, and this week, Light Talk is sponsored by
Big Fish Cakes. Have you ever wondered if your show would ever open after endless technical rehearsals that seem to have lasted a year? Does the producer show up at the theater every day with less jewelry and yet another choreographer? Well, maybe what you really need to rejuvenate your spirit is a delicious Epicurean delight of Big Fish Cakes. Made from only the choicest cuts of mystery fish, Big Fish Cakes are a doubly satisfying treat as you stagger home late at night down Fifth Avenue. Visit our sidewalk vendor locations featured in most major metropolitan cities. Sabret? No thanks. I don't need your rubbery knishes. What I need is a fish cake. Big fish cakes, sustaining you for your next year of survival in the theater.
And now, back to Light Talk with Don Holder. I've got one for you, Don. Do you enjoy using the CMY and LED to like live mix or color tune on the fly in response to costumes and scenery changes? How has this impacted your creative process?
Well, first I want to acknowledge, give a shout out to that great ad. I couldn't. It was kind of hard not to see the vague references to projects I've been involved with, or maybe that's just because
Truly coincidental.
I'm still obsessing about them.
You're still dreaming about them, right?
But it made me think of two specifically. So anyway.
Which ones are those, Max? I think we know.
One would be Big Fish, no surprise. The other, I'll let you guess.
Okay, that's not a hard guess.
Okay, so yeah, to answer your question, so I mean, the way I use color mixing, subtractive or additive, depending on CMY or LED, right, I guess it's slightly old school, or maybe it isn't, but the way we do it, and I'm sure a lot of other people do it the same way, is let's say I have a mixture which is typical of tungsten fixtures with color changers like scrollers, and LED fixtures and discharge fixtures that use CMY, subtractive color mixing. What I normally do is I start with a reference point, which would be a tungsten fixture at a specific color. So we'll take an auto yoke or a Lico with a scroller on it, put it on a white field or something close to that, and then we'll color match and build palettes for all the other color mixing fixtures that match the gel string. And that becomes kind of the go-to sort of library of palettes that I'll start working with. And then it's exactly as you asked. Once you get into the process, these colors are not exactly going to be what you need, so then there's a lot of tweaking on the fly. And I tend to not use the color picker or the spectral picking process. I tend to really break it down diode by diode, or a little bit more cyan, or a little bit more magenta, or less yellow, etc. So once I get into the tweaking on the fly, it's about the individual either dichroic flags in a CMY fixture or the individual diodes in an LED fixture, and that's what I do for pretty much any project I work on, ranging from Lion King, where we're using more and more LED, to anything, to My Fair Lady.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But has it freed you up to be able to change colors totally on the fly instantaneously?
Yes, having that flexibility is great, and being able to manipulate color on the fly is fantastic. I just think that, like anything, you just have to be careful, and I say this to my students, I also have to keep it in my own head, that infinite flexibility shouldn't be used as a crutch, that ultimately you still have to make these decisions up front. It's okay to tweak, but to basically load up your rig with fixtures that are completely flexible in almost every way, and then expect to figure it out once you get into the theater, I think is a big miscalculation. So even though you have all this ability to do things on the fly, which is fantastic and important now, you gotta sweat the details in advance. But yes, as you know, especially with new musicals and not new musicals, we as lighting designers are getting less time to work in the room. So anything we can do to make the process move more quickly, and that would include having the ability to change color on the fly, is a good thing. It means that we're going to be able to get more work done in the limited time that we have.
Yep. Do you use a lot of pre-viz?
I don't use, I've used a little bit of it to translate, let's say, a sit-down production into kind of a touring version, where then we'll pre-visualize and do as much of the sort of preliminary work in terms of color and texture and even presets in advance just to save time in the theater. But I know that some other designers do rely on it a lot more than I do, but I haven't really gotten into it too deeply.
Great. Hey, Don, please tell us about your present production of My Fair Lady at Lincoln Center. There have been a few new productions of this show in the past few years. Why do you think the show is enjoying such a successful rebirth?
Well, I think that My Fair Lady is considered, and it's not because I'm working on it now. I remember seeing it when I was a kid. I've seen the movie. I've seen, I don't know which revival of the show I saw on Broadway. This is the fourth, the one I'm working on now. But it's one of the greatest musicals ever written, I think. It's based on Shaw's Pygmalion. It's an amazing text. And then on top of that, you have this incredible score. And it's filled with so many songs that we all really know. Probably a lot of people don't know where they came from, but it's just a fantastic evening. And it's really, I feel like it's more like an amazing play with great music as opposed to a musical, quote unquote. Why is it so popular now? I think because what I just said, it's just a great piece. I think it deals with issues and makes people think about their relationship to men's relationships to women and women, then their relationship to men. And I think it's a very thought-provoking, kind of important piece, especially now, given the Me Too movement, Time's Up movement. What is, how do men relate to women? What is the role of women in our society? Is there equality? It's interesting that in My Fair Lady, Shaw has dealt with these issues, and I think in a very progressive, kind of contemporary way. Some people think of My Fair Lady and suggest because of maybe the way the ending of the film is, they remember the ending of the film in a certain way that perhaps it wasn't particularly respectful to the female point of view. But I think if you really read Pygmalion and you really think about the piece, it presents Eliza as this brave woman who's sort of bucking convention and finding her own way. And it's really about Shaw saying there really shouldn't be any boundaries between gender, between race, people of different races, that we're all equal. And I think that's the message really in My Fair Lady. And so even though some people might think it's old-fashioned, it's quite, I think, progressive and contemporary in its point of view. And you couple that with the amazing story, the humor, and the beautiful music, you can't go wrong, I don't think.
I totally agree, and I just did a new production of it in Italy, at the San Carlo, and I totally agree. I mean, this woman is her own woman. She's strong. I think there's there could be a better time for it.
Right.
And also, My Fair Lady has some very, very long book scenes, but you can't cut any of them because they're brilliant.
Right.
I mean, there's no way. So My Fair Lady seems, as far as time is concerned, is rather a long show, but there's nothing you can cut out of it, and it holds the attention of the audience, especially now.
Yeah.
It really does. It's interesting because the end, you're talking about the end in the movie where they sort of have sort of like that fade out at the end. The way we ended it is she took a shoe and threw it at him.
Oh, really?
It was like, screw you, It was actually really good.
Well,
But,
I mean, because I remember Rex Harrison says his last line is, "Where are my slippers?" Yeah. And then he tips his hat down and end of, fade out, end of musical, which I think is, well, I'm not going to sort of do a spoiler alert here and tell you how ours ends, but it doesn't end that way. Let's put it that way. But I think it's one thing, one kind of anecdote about doing this show on Broadway, related to you mentioning the length of the show itself. I mean, it's a tricky thing on a Broadway stage when you have 28 musicians in the orchestra and a cast of 37 and a lot of stagehands. in a theater that has a limited number of seats, I mean, the length of the running time is of huge concern. So even though there's not a lot to cut, we have to get it under 3 hours, because if we don't, there's huge overtime costs involved. So we're spending a lot of our time right now doing exactly what you probably don't want to do, and finding ways to get it under that golden hour where everybody gets paid overtime, or else the show does not run.
Right.
But it's interesting, because you're exactly right. It's not that the audience is bored. I think they would stay for 4 hours, but
Yeah.
it's just about money, really, and it's about the finances involved in running a Broadway show.
Yeah, this is when the whole commercial thing comes in. Yeah, you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
And it happens also in opera too, because you go into overtime, it's pretty expensive. But I must tell you, the one beautiful thing about doing this show at the San Carlo is that you get to hear it with a full orchestra.
Yeah.
And it is,
It's score.
great. Even it's amazing. It really is beautiful. Anyway, good luck with that show.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
It's been a real pleasure to work on it. So I hope you get to see it.
All right, well, we'll expect those house seats,
Okay.
over in New York.
All right, you have my email address.
Well, Don, could you take a moment? I mean, you have had a foot firmly placed in the commercial world, and you've also balanced that with the foot you have placed in the educational world. Can you take a moment to talk about what you think we as educators should be doing to make our students a little bit better prepared for the profession?
Well, I think that the hardest thing to teach a student, especially a lighting designer, is how to communicate, not just verbally, but also written communication. I'm not suggesting that we all, as lighting educators, become English professors. But what I am suggesting is that I think teaching a student how to think and how to talk and how to assimilate ideas and develop their analytical sense and become more articulate human beings, that I think is vital for a young lighting designer's education. In other words, can a young kid read a script and be able to talk about point of view and talk about the relationship of the light to that point of view, and to be able to do research and assimilate ideas into a coherent and unified design, and be able to talk about it to a group of collaborators? I mean, if you can get a student to get to that point where they're able to communicate, and that they've acquired the essential skills they need to go out and begin to make a living as an assistant or a designer, that's a lot to teach in 4 years. In fact, I think it's a huge responsibility we have to give our students at least that. So it's twofold. It's about making them better, more articulate communicators, human beings, readers, people who go to the theater, who watch film, who read books, who read the newspaper, who can talk about everything that's going on in the world, and who can really take an idea and crystallize it into actual real work. So there's that, and then giving them the basic skills that they need in terms of drafting and technique, et cetera, so that they can actually be employable. That is my goal. I mean, I don't know if I'm completely successful, but I'm teaching in a conservatory program, and that is our principal objective, and that's how I'm approaching it.
How difficult was communication for you when you were just starting out?
It was very difficult because my undergraduate degree was in forestry. So, I mean, I was always interested in lighting design since I was 12 years old, but I had no undergraduate training in theater history, script analysis, history of costume design, none of it. I mean, all of the opportunities that these BFA students get now in terms of the academic core curriculum, I wish I had when I was an 18-year-old, 20-year-old kid. I just didn't know what I needed, and I wasn't quite sure that I was going to be a lighting designer. So yes, I was working at a disadvantage. I made the decision to do this, and because it was a passion of mine, but I had none of the intellectual sort of analytical preparation. I mean, I was effectively majoring in biology as an undergraduate, or a branch of biology. So it's not like I didn't get an interesting education, but it wasn't really preparing me to go into a room and collaborate and to understand process, because I didn't. So I had to learn all that, and the only reason I'm sitting here today talking to you is because I went to graduate school. I understood that I needed to basically start from the beginning as a blank slate and really learn process and learn how to talk and learn how to think. So for me, it was graduate school. It's not like that other time was wasted, because those were important years in terms of developing my eye and understanding the technical aspects, I guess, of light and working with the medium. Of course, that's really important. But the intellectual, sort of analytical, creative aspects of our work, I think, are the hardest things to learn on your own. I think it's really important, and we have an obligation to try to give that to our students. And I wish I would have had that because I do feel like it took me a long time to get to that point. I struggled with it for a long time.
Well, let me ask you this, another way of thinking about this. Do you think what has made you successful is that slightly late start in training? And you didn't bring any rules with you. I mean, you sound like you were an open book when you came to Yale.
Yeah, I don't know if that was it. But I think that I come from a technical background also, right? I mean, I started as an electrician. I was doing electrician work. I had a musical I think a lot, it's hard to say, but I feel like I've always been a kind of a pragmatic person when it comes to lighting design. In other words, I was a technical director. I built scenery. I hung lights. I went on tours where I was an electrician. So I understand the nuts and bolts, at least of the way it was in the 80s, late 80s, how to do those jobs. And it really does play, even now, an important role in terms of the way I think about the work and the way I interact with my collaborators. That's one thing. But I also think that what was important for me is I started studying music when I was 6 years old. I played the violin, I played the string bass, I played the tuba, all the way up through and including graduate school. And I feel like that education and that exposure to music and understanding music has really helped me in huge ways in designing light with music, whatever the form is that I happen to be working with. But I do think that you're right. I came into grad school with maybe some bad habits, but really not knowing what the heck I was doing. And I really did have to start from the beginning. So maybe that was also helpful. I never had a plan about getting from point A to point B or what I wanted to be doing at a certain time in my life. I just kind of decided to do something and did it. And things worked out for me. But I never had an established timeline, or nobody ever told me about what I had to do when in order to get where I wanted to be. I just started working and did the best I could, and good things happened, fortunately for me.
That's a really wonderful image, I have to say, is you studying design at Yale, working on a project, walking away from it, and picking up your tuba and practicing at your apartment.
I mean, I had a piano.
But I was a TD&P student at Yale. I mean, I was a technical designer. I was a TD student at Yale, and I was also in the lighting program studying with Jennifer at the same time. I was one of the only other person I think who did that as a lighting designer was Jim Ingalls. I believe he had the same kind of background a little before me. But I think that was helpful too. Yeah, but I played in the Yale band, and that was great. I mean, it was sort of a great departure from the intensity of grad school, that's for sure.
So what advice would you give to our young listeners out there who want to reach the same heights as your career?
Well, I think I gave a little bit of advice, sort of tangentially already, is become the most articulate, sort of well-rounded people you can be, and that's not necessarily studying lighting catalogs or doing all that and going to trade shows. I guess is important, but really, I'd say reading books and reading and seeing things and learning how to talk and think and be an articulate young person is the best thing you can do in terms of moving ahead in life, no matter what it is that you choose to do. That's number one. Being a good communicator, learning how to write, and learning how to speak. It's something I'm still working on. I think we work on for our entire life. That's number one. Number two is remember that the life of a lighting designer is not an easy one, and it's also not. You have to be patient. It's more of a marathon than it is a sprint. You have to be prepared to give all of yourself plus more in order to make it to where you hopefully want to be. It requires a lot of work. It requires stamina, not only intellectual, but also physical stamina. It requires patience, like I said. It's not going to happen immediately. Don't impose that kind of pressure on yourself. You have to hang in there and believe in yourself and realize that the only person you can ultimately count on is you and the people who you love. And remember that as a lighting designer, you're going to fail. But the best time to fail, I think, is while you're in school as opposed to when you're out of school. Understand your limitations. In other words, don't do too much. Learn how to say no. That's really important. I don't think I'm that good at that. Obviously, you read my bio.
Yeah. I'm sure you say no a lot too.
No, but I don't think I'm a very good role model in that. Well, I think I'm getting better. Learn and keep especially when you're starting out, keep your overhead low. In other words, when you get out of school and you start working, don't try to minimize your financial obligations so you can take advantage of opportunities that may not pay a lot but are good. I mean, I think the most important thing a young designer can do is to start working and make connections, because really relationships are what will propel you to the next level. It's about getting yourself out there. You let your work speak for yourself. Be a good collaborator, and by keeping your overhead low and keeping the financial requirements of your life low, you can, when that project being in the right place at the right time happens to you, because it's happened to me, you're able to take advantage of that. So, study hard, work hard in school, prepare yourself so when you have opportunities when they come your way, you're able to take full advantage of them. So that's a long-winded answer to the question.
No, but it's all great, Don. And thank you so much again for joining us on our 1-year anniversary show of Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much.
I think Don is more amazed than anyone else that we've made it for.
Well, this is the first time I've participated, so now I know about it. I'm gonna be a regular listener.
Oh, fantastic! Fantastic!
Great. Cool.
And also thanks for all the wonderful art you have created over the years. We are looking forward to seeing what you have in store for us in the future, and hopefully we'll be spending more 1-year tech rehearsals and pre-viz.
I certainly hope not.
Hey guys, well, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another precious 45 minutes of your life listening to Light Talk. Look for the next episode of Light Talk here on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, Spotify, or the Light Talk Facebook group page. And while there, post your comments and questions and be sure to subscribe to Light Talk. That way you won't miss 1 second of Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
In other words, don't burn down your theater.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
Don't forget to keep those questions coming and topics for us to discuss. You can email us at David, Stan, or Steve at lighttalk.org, and remember our website, lighttalk.org.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss buying used lighting equipment, bargain headset systems, good club lighting, respecting theatrical unions, and our lighting review of Jesus Christ Superstar live in concert.
All that and a new sponsor. Light Talk, coming your way every Saturday.
We would like to thank you, our loyal listeners, for putting up with our madness for a year. And thank you again, Don Holder, for being a part of our anniversary show. See you all next week. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, and thanks, Don.
Bye.
Bye.
Light Talk. Light Talk. Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk.
Nice.